Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. Many of you have been from the very beginning, which is now going on 9 years, and I appreciate how long you've stayed with us. I particularly want to thank the Sage Club here in Acalanes. They've become a go-to organization for us. If we have a packing party, they're there. They've washed cars, they made whoppies, which you'll see here in a minute. They've been a club that's been willing to step up every time we've asked them to, and I really appreciate. They're a very active club, very dedicated club, and I want to thank them for hosting this tonight, as well as the Acalanes Parents Club. Now, the reason I want an opportunity to speak to you tonight is on the subject of women, and what my experience has been with women, and what my fears are, and what I think we can do about it. This is a photo that many of you have seen before. This was one that was sent to me before I even went over there, because I asked them to send me a photograph of the school children that were going to be going to the school who were girls. And look at the body language. The one thing that's noticeable is all the heads are down. All the heads are down, signifying submission. I don't see head downs anymore. All of these classes we go into, like the ones where you saw at the spelling bee, the heads are up, they can look me in the eye, they're not afraid. And these are some of the photographs that we're getting now. This is where they start out. This is where young women start out. We hope they go to there. Then we hope they get a little bit older and put their hands on their hip, do that Helen Reddy, hear me roar, I am woman. But then I ran into this woman. And this woman, again, I apologize for those who read the newsletter, but for those who haven't, this is critical. This is a woman who stood up in the back of the classroom and said to me, how about me? I have nothing to do all day long. I would like to take classes. I have nothing to do, and I'm sick. I go to the doctor and I tell my doctor I'm sick, but he says I'm not sick. But I know I'm sick because I'm hitting my children. Imagine telling me this in front of a room full of children, that her isolation is such and her depression is such that she knows she's taking it out on her children. And all of us have been made aware, too, of the isolation of women inside some Afghan households through the book written by Khaled Hosseini, 1,000 Splendid Sons. And if you haven't read it, I recommend that you do. This is where she can also end up. It's not easy to get photographs of women over there, although it's interesting. You have a group of women who say, sure, take my photograph. And then you have a group of women that run for cover and live underneath the burqas, living beneath the radar. So I want to talk about conditions inside many households, and unfortunately it's not a few. It's many households. First, child marriages. Child marriages are illegal. Child marriage is a marriage where one of the spouses is under the age of 16. The United Nations did a report and reported that 57% of the marriages in Afghanistan were child marriages. Somebody's under the age of 16. Of the 57% that were child marriages, 40% of those were married between the age of 10 and 13. 32.5% were married at the age of 14. So of the child marriages, 72% are being married at the age of 14 or under. There was a survey that was done inside one of the refugee camps a couple of years ago, and they determined that 50% of the girls aged 10 were either married or engaged. The United Nations then reported on a young girl who was 20 years old in 2009 who went to court to set aside an engagement that was arranged for her when she was 4 years old. She had the law on her side. It's illegal to force a girl to marry. It's illegal to do that. She went to court to set it aside. 300 villagers showed up. They ran in. They kidnapped her. They took her to her in-laws, and she hasn't been seen from since. They tried to reach her, were not able to reach her, and they don't know what happened to her. The report went on to say that girls are often married to raise money for the marriages of their sons. It also went on to say that if a girl is married, she's going to be out of school. Because one of the factors that's involved in leaving school is that the families don't want their daughters going to school with a girl who's married. So if she is married, she's going to end up having to stop her education. Forced marriages are also illegal. And there are forced marriages that can take place when a husband dies. If your husband dies, you're expected to marry one of his brothers and go into their house, become part of their family. If you don't, you run the risk of losing your children. Because the way the law works is that once a girl reaches the age of 9 or a boy reaches the age of 7, then in the case of death or divorce or guardianship, the children go to the father or the father's family. So a woman whose husband dies, who has children over the age of 7 and 9, she either marries into that family or she loses her children. Those are her choices. And the enforcement of laws inside Afghanistan, and for heaven's sakes, don't let me get you too depressed. If you want to raise your hand and say, stop it, it does get better, because I'm going to talk to you tonight about a possible solution. The United Nations report found that officials tend to punish the female victims. You're dealing in a society where some people believe that the testimony of a woman is worth half that of a man. Bought is the practice of exchanging a girl to resolve a dispute between families. One son kills another son, you take 2 of my daughters. When the daughters go over into the other family in exchange to resolve the dispute, they are often treated like slaves. And they're punished for the acts of the brother. And at times, they are then forbidden to actually have any more contact with their own family or their siblings and their brothers and sisters. This is also illegal. Now, the question has been, what's going to happen to women in 2014? What's going to happen to them? We don't even have to wait till 2014. In March of this year, and this was in the Wall Street Journal within the last couple of weeks, the Wall Street Journal report, which is one of the reasons that triggered me into wanting to spend so much time on this tonight, is there's a ulema council in Afghanistan, which is a religious council in Afghanistan that's supported by the Afghan government. And they issued a rule that said, and I'm quoting here, I'm not using my own language, I'm quoting from the Wall Street Journal, a man is entitled to beat his wife if she is found to be disobedient. Now you can say that, well, that's just a religious council. But President Karzai actually endorsed the creed of that council. A few weeks ago, a woman was executed publicly for accused of adultery. And there were several observers in the village that watched the execution. And unfortunately, it's on YouTube. And it's true, I watched it to see whether in fact there were people around who were cheering it on, and there were. And this wasn't far from Kabul. This was done on the Parwan district, not far from Kabul. What are we doing about it? What are we doing about the subjugation of women, the abuse of women, the treatment of women in this way? What you and I are engaged in is what I think it should be described as a hope strategy. What our strategy is that we educate them, and we hope that over time we can educate them out of abusing, mistreating, and treating women as chattel. Or we hope that we can educate the woman and we can empower her to run away from or become equal to the man that's in the house. And I personally believe that that strategy, a hope strategy, is just taking too long. We shouldn't sit by and just hope that we can educate ourselves towards fairness. After all, the United States, who knows how long it took from the day they had the first meeting on the right of a woman to vote and when women acquired the right to vote. 70 years. 70 years in this country it took from the first day they met until 1920 when women were given the right to vote. Now, I ran into this guy. He's actually been very friendly. He's been a leader of a village we've worked with, and he was on the team that was designated to negotiate with the Taliban. That was before the leader was killed. But I asked him, and I said to him, you know, I'm a little concerned about the negotiations that are going to go on with the Taliban because there's not a single woman in the room. I didn't say it so forcefully. And Navi did the interpreting. And then he went through a long answer, very long answer. And then Navi turned to me and he said, doesn't Bud know that women's brains are smaller than men's? What do you say? What do you say? So I'm sitting there fuming, and I'm trying to come up with something, and I said, turn to Navi and I said, look, Navi, tell him it's not the size of the brain that counts, it's how much of it you're using. Navi looks back at me and smiles. He says, Bud, I think we better change the subject. Well, I came back to the United States, and it turns out that, lo and behold, women's brains are smaller than men's by about 10%. But, when I went to law school at Berkeley, there were 275 men, or 275 students, and less than 20 of those were women. Today, over 50% of the admissions to college, law school, business school, and medical school are women. So there was a man at a Rotary Club a couple of weeks ago when I laid all those facts out. He says, well, what's your point? I said, we should have never given them the right to vote. But no, the dynamics in this society are going to be very interesting in about 50 years because the pendulum is swinging. In fact, it's a little known, not published secret, but there's actually an effort within the colleges to admit men so that the proportion of women in the college does not exceed 60%. Because they find that if you have more than 60% women in a college, men don't want to go there, and the women don't want to go there. So boys, there's actually a 7% better chance of you getting in than a girl. So in any event, I want to go back one of these days and talk to him about what's happened in the United States, because he's still back at their brains are smaller. Why should they be in the room? So what you and I are engaged in the HOPE strategy, and I think that's inadequate. So what is the U.S. government doing about gender equality and moving the agenda forward towards gender equality? You listen to the presidential debate? I did. How many times did you hear the words women or woman mentioned in the presidential debate on the U.S. foreign policy? 0. It is not part of our foreign policy debate. It is not one of our goals in our foreign policy. And I think it should be. I think it should be. So here's what I propose. That the United States foreign policy recognize and include the promotion and attainment of gender equality as one of our top priorities. It become part of our foreign policy, and we bring it out into the open. I get the sense that Hillary Clinton, on the side, is attempting to achieve the advancement of women's rights. But there's no public debate, at least in the foreign arena. When we talk about foreign policy in the United States, what we're talking about oftentimes are what? Strategic interests. What do we define as our strategic interests? Anybody? Shout it out. Oil. 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 Or our business interests. Or as Nabi recognizes, we're negotiating with Afghanistan right now and leaving soldiers because we want to have a base. We want to have a base next to Iran. We have a military strategic interest. That's what we talk about when we're talking about U.S. foreign policy. The next thing we need to do, other than talk about it, is we have to put our money where our values lie. We need to start conditioning foreign aid upon a government's willingness and ability to demonstrate that it is moving towards gender equality. We need to tie our money to it. Why do I think that? Because I think it'll work. In countries like Afghanistan, the fifth poorest country in the world, money talks. It does. It buys things. You can buy justice in Afghanistan. We've heard that time and time again. You can buy justice. Why not buy some for women? Now, they're not going to like it. And there are those who are going to argue that this is a cultural difference. I reject that notion. The subjugation of women and the control of women, treating them like chattel, is not a cultural difference. It's a difference in strength and size. Women thousands of years ago didn't decide that they wanted to be subservient. It's not their culture, it's their condition. So what I am proposing we do is that we begin to put pressure on, and we may not even have to put that much pressure, this will be interesting to see, on Washington to insist that we make it a priority, and second, we start tying our money to it. And it's going to take time, it has to evolve over time, it's not something you can do tomorrow. But here's the thing about it, we're not really saying do it. We're not coming in and imposing our values on anybody. We're simply saying that the American people have spoken. The American people see the equal treatment of the sexes as something that they want to support. And if you want the money, American people also want you to move towards gender equality as well. It'll become part of the application, the grant application. How are you doing on gender equality? So I know you're going to have lots of questions and we might have some debate on this, but I just can't sit idly by anymore. That young girl in Pakistan, you all know about that, right? You all know about that. Where's the international outrage? It gets news coverage. Have they caught the people yet? It can't be that difficult to find. So any event, I think we can make it part of the international debate. Hopefully other countries will join in. And I heard us referred to as America as the beacon of light. Well, let's shine the beacon on it and see if the rats run for cover. And that's pretty much what I wanted to say tonight. Yes?
So my question is, how is this equality going to work? What kind of education are boys getting? How is it going to work if they aren't learning to respect and honor and have more equality?
See, that becomes part and parcel of how they achieve gender equality. It's up to them. See, we're not, again, we get into this cultural imperialism argument, go try to impose your values on them. First of all, we're saying we're not imposing our values. We've just stated our values. If you want our money, this is what you need to do, but you don't have to take it. But then it's up to them. And yes, education is a very important component of that.
So if you're only educating the women for them to realize they should have equality, You know, how are the males going to respond to that if they aren't learning also
Yes.
to accept that?
You've touched upon something that's very important. We educate both boys and girls. We're not over there educating just girls. Remember, 1,250 students, 45% are girls. It's very important to educate the boys. The rights for women are going to come about through men.
But the
It
education,
doesn't take very long to convince a woman she needs more rights.
but the education that men are getting, the young boys are getting in schools that you're not in charge of, what kind of education are they getting to make them more aware of
See,
gender
again,
equality?
I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful that we're talking about the fringe element, that it's not as pervasive. For example, they took a poll in Afghanistan and determined that 90% of them want the girls to go to school. But the guys that bring the guns and kill people and shoot people get all the news. But what we want to do, what we really want Afghanistan to do in particular, is get rid of ridiculous laws that allow people to beat their wives, because that sends a message from the top down that it's okay. But the other thing that we really want them to do is take more money and resources and put it into law enforcement. Enforce the laws that are already on the books. But we're not telling you what to do. Right? We're not telling what you do.
It's a little steps at a time, isn't it?
Yeah, baby steps.
Baby steps.
Baby steps. But it's really important that we get started.
Hillary Clinton's former chief of staff, Melanie Verveer, I believe is her name, is currently the State Department's liaison or undersecretary for women's issues.
Right.
Is she someone who has been on your radar, who is working with anyone in Afghanistan to address these issues? And do you know what she's actually up to and trying to achieve through the State Department itself?
This gem of an idea started a week ago. Gem of an idea, right? Gender equality matters. No, that's really what I'm hoping everybody else will help do. Make the contacts, develop the language, you'll send the language, we'll develop the, what do you call it? We used to, in Berkeley, we used to do it all the time, right? Go march and demonstrate. It comes from us. The American people say, this is our value, this is what we're willing to pay for. I don't think it's going to happen in Washington by itself. And I don't think it's going to happen without pressure. Because again, we've got that oil interest we have to be concerned about. But again, this can be phased in over time. I mean, one way to approach it is say, here's a pot of money, and it has tied to it the condition that you're moving towards gender equality. You want some of this money, come get it. But you have to be willing to use it. And I think they will. I absolutely think they will. Who wants to stand up and say no publicly?
Hi, I have a question about the marriages. What happens to the young girl or the woman who is married but not able to have children?
Well, it's a very common practice that Afghans or a lot of countries in that part of the region, they like to have children, especially boys. If they cannot have children, then they go for the second wife or the third wife. Because according to the Muslim religion, they can get married if they can afford four wives.
On the issue, what I'm talking about here financially in terms of tying the finances and the aid to achieving gender equality, I was back at the University of Pennsylvania last week and I was invited to be on a panel of students who are studying to work internationally. And there was a young man from India, and I brought this subject up, so it's about a week and a half old. And he said, it's very interesting, but in India, what they did in India is that the people in some section of the country were killing their daughters. They didn't want their girls, and they were killing them. So what they did is they built into the tax code that your taxes would be lower if you had a daughter or two. And it worked. Just a little thing like a tax break stopped people from killing their daughters.
She's valuable now.
Pardon me?
She's valuable now.
Yeah, she's valuable now. I mean, Look at what's happened in the United States. It makes absolutely no sense to take half your population, and remember the old 60s when we said barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen? Now it's barefoot, pregnant, and standing over the open fire, which is dangerous for you, which is why you should have a solar oven. It makes no sense economically, and it's certainly not fair. So we're actually moving them towards a society that's going to be more productive. This is actually going to be better for them over time.
I totally agree with you. I read an article actually this morning in the New York Times about a young girl in Afghanistan that jumped off her roof because she didn't want to marry a guy that she was supposed to get married for since she was 9 years old. She ended up crippled, not dead, much to her dismay.
Right.
But my concern is with this effort, I agree with it, but I think your wording and everything has to be very careful, because I think this is a country where they could put laws on the books, but they turn the other way. And the measurement is going to be a key thing. How do you measure gender equality, not what laws you have on the books?
Right. See, if we could start off with taking that one law off the books, right? And they came in and we said, okay, we got rid of that law. And we also got rid of some other laws that are particularly onerous. Oh, incidentally, here's another reason why I'm actually charged up about tying money to aid in achieving results. There have been a group of men over in Afghanistan who have been going over the shelters for women, where the woman runs away from home from either she doesn't want to marry the guy, she's being abused, she's been raped, she runs away and she ends up in a shelter. There are men over there who are calling those prostitutes and whores. And they've been trying to get rid of those shelters. So a year ago, there was a proposal that was made in earnest that there should be a test on these women for virginity, that every woman in the shelter would have to undergo a virginity test. And then she would also have to explain to a government panel why she should be permitted to stay there. This was a proposal. Wall Street Journal said, a couple of Western nations says, you do that, we're cutting back on a couple of these programs that we're going to finance. And it was dropped.
Early in a child's life in your school, I assume that both genders are attending the same class. And is there a point at which they're segregated?
Like when I was living in Afghanistan, kids could go to the same class from 1st grade to 6th grade. And then once we go to high school, from 7 to 12, girls and boys school separate. And then back in the university, we sit together. But now, there are up to like 4th grade, they sit together, but after that, they're separate. And then when they go to university, they sit together.
See, the part that's missing, again, is the advocacy for women. Who cares? And one of the practical problems is you're in a country where you can get killed for your ideas. And it's very effective. So it's not always easy to stand up. That's the one thing that Karzai is basically universally accused of doing, is not being able to stand up. But then he has personal risk for doing that. Yeah, Navi.
I just wanted to add one more thing. Right now in the parliament, there is about, I think, 30% of women in the Afghan parliament. And then there is one woman that she said she might run for the next election. She's a member of the parliament. She's a very young lady, I think 32 years old. So she's also thinking to run for the next election.
So we'll start a super PAC. No, it's very interesting because their constitution guarantees women the right to 25%, which is more than we have in our Congress, right? But there was somebody who proposed about a year or so ago that it be a maximum of 25% women. And I think what they're discovering is that women are beating men in the election, so they wanted to limit them to 25%. There's a story of a woman who ran against her husband, and she won. And she not only won, she beat him handily. And they're not living together anymore. But no, it's that fear of, my gosh, there might be 30% or 40%, or they might even be the president. I didn't realize it, but that's the first election they've ever held in Afghanistan. And one of the things that Afghanistan has going for it is it does have the right to vote, men and women.
But what happens when or are there any divorce? What is that whole situation about? If their woman or man want to divorce, is that a possibility? And if so, what happens? Where is that?
Divorce is legal in Afghanistan. A woman can go file for a divorce. It's going to be very difficult, but it is possible. But before she asks for a divorce, it's kind of a cultural. She has to convince her family, because a lot of time the family, they don't want to take her back into the family. So it's very difficult for a woman to ask for a divorce. It is legal, they can go apply for divorce, but she has to convince her family first.
And bear in mind what I said earlier, is not only might she lose her family, but she could lose her kids. Because they automatically go to the husband if the girl's over the age of 9 and the boy's is over the age of 7. So she has to be prepared to leave her children.
Are many women in Afghanistan still wearing a burqa? Or is it just women who are way out in the countryside?
Navi?
How much has that changed since 1995?
It's been changing. Let's say since the last 10 years that we've been going back and forth, you can see a less number of women are wearing burqa, especially women who work outside in the ministries and teachers or girls go to school, they don't wear burqa. It's like a choice now. A choice, a lot of women who wear burqa, they are afraid. They are afraid to be seen out in the public without burqa, and they say, what happened if the Taliban come back? And then some women are forced by the families. Like when we had that Skype night, we wanted to, there was one of the parents, a mother, we wanted her to come and with her burqa to be in front of the Skype for the kids to see here in the States. She said she's not allowed to come on in front of the camera because her husband will get upset. But then there was another woman, she put on the burqa and she also left the burqa. She was very brave, she didn't care. So it depends on the family, but people who work outside, teachers, employees, schools, they don't wear burqa. It's a choice.
See, we're in a very unique position now, being able to help these people on the front line. The women who are willing to take off the burqa and take the chance. I want to thank you so much for coming tonight.